Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hello, Jean Ha. Lovely to see you again.
Hi, Mimi. It's great to be back.
Oh my goodness. I feel so blessed because this is, I believe, like your fourth time on the podcast, but also we've got to hang out in person now.
A few times, yeah.
Yes, it's so amazing. And of course, I have to lead with eternally grateful to you for so many reasons. One, always being a podcast guest, but you are also one of the artists in our Make Us Visible Florida Asian American History activity book. And we're so gracious to include multiple pieces of artwork, not just one. And I want you to know. From all the Floridians, they are so grateful because it is already
Aw.
being used and taught in school. Used to be as a like kind of as a history book, and so we are working on getting that out there a little bit more. But so grateful to you, and your artwork is not just being enjoyed from a comic fan aspect, but also kids in elementary school are getting to kind of learn from your work.
I mean, beyond, of course, wanting to make a living, it's also just in art and making that my full-time job. It's also really nice knowing I can do some art that makes a difference. And if, the next time you have something like that come up, I would like to be on board. So
Oh my
it's really
goodness.
fun
I love
because
that.
I know
Thank
you're
you.
not going to
And
stop.
listeners just heard Gina basically commit to a future project with me, and I will always take you up on that. I have to say, there is now from that book, I'm so fortunate. I have to say, as the person that was kind of helping put this together, I got so much benefit. I have all this amazing original artwork now from all of you and of all the collaborators, and so it's like all over my house. But of course, one of the pages was the Mulan Mimi page, so now it
Oh,
feels
yeah.
really weird to have just a bunch of artwork of me like all around my house. It feels a little bit kind of, self-centered, but it's such beautiful art. I want people to see it. So,
I mean, in a weird sense, it's not, it's, there's the you, who, the person you live, in your head, inside your own body and all that. But there's also the you who is, and I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to give you a big head, obviously, but the you who actually does things and that other people are like, oh, she did some things inside of Florida. I can do that inside of California or Illinois. And in a sense, that's the person we're drawing.
yeah, thank you. That is amazing. And you are right though, because of the work that we've been doing here, it has
Yeah.
actually inspired other states. And that's the goal. The goal is to inspire, and continuously push for more Asian American and Pacific Islander history across the nation, across the world, but in particular in a time like we're having now where history is so important and learning from our past mistakes are so important, but also learning from our triumphs. So
Yeah.
it's just really prescient to be kind of talking to you
Yeah.
as not just an artist, but I think you're definitely an educator of sorts because a lot of your work goes towards educating and bringing people on board. You do a lot of really amazing uh one-on-one
Yeah.
events where
Oh.
I've seen you in action in the comic panels and everything like that at Comic Cons, but I will say, at the Wonder Woman Historia reunion that you and I got to enjoy together and it was just so much fun. But every person that came up, you just give such a personal touch on your signature and the art. And then some of the kids that happened to be with me for my Kung Fu team were there. You like gifted them your pen that you drew
Oh.
with, and then you educated them on the type of pen because they were interested in art or it was a marker. I'm gonna botch it
Yeah.
up, but I think it's just incredible. Like your reach is also there, even as in different scales, from like one-on-one to like the grand scale of the Comic Con. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to say, like, obviously, it would, if I ever had the chance to hang out with you, uh, in sweatpants or pajamas, watching bad TV and eating potato chips, I'm sure you do something along those lines. But
Yes.
that's probably never gonna be the you I'm gonna draw, but that one exists and it's totally real. Just that's the thing that no one else gets to see.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I was like, Gene, do you have like a camera and like wired into my security? How do you know that is what I do? My husband is going to be dying right now hearing that. Oscar's going to just die hearing you say that. It was funny because today he goes, who do you have on the podcast? Because I was like running around the house. We're recording this in December, pre-Christmas. So of course there's like packages everywhere that hasn't been opened. We've been traveling. And I'm like, I have Gene Hall. He goes, oh, okay. Well, that'll be nice and smooth for you. Like, he's so nice. He's just so accommodating. You're definitely going to be not a quote unquote easy podcast, but he's like, all right, you don't have to be stressed out. He puts you at
Yeah.
ease. I'm like, oh yeah, Gene's amazing. So all good. Well, it's been so great to catch up with you. And one of the reasons we are here to chat today is about your amazing creation and all of this coming out of the head of Jean Ha of May. And actually, the first time you and I spoke and connected, it was because of May. And so I
Yes.
love that we're kind of coming full circle. And I'm so grateful because I did get a preview of this book and got to go back on the journey again with our Mae and Abbie and the adventure. And I can't wait to hear about all of the things and discuss all of the themes with you because I have to say, reading it as someone who has a sister and a sibling
Uh,
and thinking, yeah, I totally wish I'd be on some of these adventures and also not want to be on some of the adventures with some of those creatures. But at the same time, there's a lot of tones in it that really hits home for me. So talk to me about how you're feeling about having this, where you're at this point in this project, because it's quite a lot. I mean, we're at, is that like 400 pages?
oh man, yeah, it's like 12 oversized issues, then bonus pages, bonus features, old pinups, new pinups, new oh yeah, it's just yeah, we gotta jam everything into it. Just like extra stories. Let me see. I'm gonna just hold up this in my PDF copy of the new
Gorgeous.
edition. And so it came out originally in two volumes, and those volumes sold out worldwide at the distributor level. So you cannot buy a new copy online. You can buy used copies, but that's it. And the
Mm.
publisher, when they realized this last year, said, "Oh, maybe we should do a new edition." So I've been went to work adding some. They didn't ask me to do bonus pages, but I said, if I'm going to do a new edition, it's going to have extra story inside of it. And we put both volumes inside of one book. There's some things where on a 22-page standard American comic book issue, we couldn't fit everything in that I might want to do. And I was like, well, these aren't issues, 22-page issues. I can just expand the story wherever I want. So little things get explained that didn't get explained before, and little one way I'm going to put it is character moments that I didn't have room for before get added in. And a friend of mine who's also a writer on one of the two guest issues that are guest written, Molly Jane Famer, said, "Oh, there's a love triangle inside of this book. You need to give a little more time to that love triangle." So I gave each of the boys that May is interested in and who are interested in her a little bit of extra screen time to expand out on the relationships. And some technology that I didn't totally, some alien world technology I didn't explain before gets a little more explained. And then a big thing is that, oh, well, I'm going to give you the people who haven't read May, I'm going to give a little bit of
Yes,
an elevator pitch. So,
please.
okay, so May is a modern fantasy book about two sisters. The main character, May, is the younger sister. The older sister and the cool kid action hero, Abby, is the older sister. And 8 years before the story starts, she disappears. And then the story starts with May just out of high school, getting a call from the local sheriff's department in rural Indiana that they found her sister and she's drunk. She needs to be picked up. And her sister has a drunken wild tale about how she's been in another world, like Oz or Narnia, but full of mad scientists and monsters and her army of barbarian warrior cats, which obviously May does not believe up until some of the monsters start following her sister back to Indiana. Their dad disappears, chaos breaks out, and they both have to go back to that world to figure out who took their dad. One of the parts of the story I did get expand out on is the moment where the younger sister, or the older sister, Abby, when she was 13 years old, decided she didn't want to go back to Earth anymore. And that's why she disappeared. She found a doorway to another world. And like a lot of unhappy 13-year-olds, if you find a better fantasy world where you're a hero instead of a downtrodden outsider maybe you might want to stay inside that other world. Because if I had a chance at the age of 13 to live inside the Star Wars universe, I probably would never have come back.
And which character would you have been in the Star Wars universe? Or of
There's the
which
one I wished I
music
was.
is?
I mean,
Yeah.
every boy that age wants to be some type of lightsaber wielding Jedi,
Right,
or
right.
in my case, I would have wanted to be Han Solo.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, let's be honest, Gene Ha at 13 would have been Jar Jar Binks.
I don't know about that.
He
I
did some
find
good things
that
eventually.
this is true. This is true. There was some redeeming qualities, I guess, but
Yeah.
I think we'll leave that episode one on the t off the table for discussion right now.
I was a very awkward 13-year-old, so
I hear you. I feel like even the cool kids are awkward, right? Like in our
yeah.
minds, we were all awkward at 13. I mean, I will say that when I was thinking about the book and I was thinking about the characters and things like that, it didn't really dawn on me that they were so young because they're doing such adult things and going through. But as a 13-year-old, I was thinking back because it kind of makes you relive your youth when you read books like this. And as a 13-year-old, you're like, oh yeah, you did think you were all grown up, right? You did think that you could take on the world and you did think that you could battle monsters and make all these changes, especially if you were living in a fantastical world. And so yes, I agree. Is your because this was your brainchild, and I know we talked about this in the a few years ago when we first met and you first introduced May to me. But I think for our listeners that might not go back and listen to up at that episode, like, was this character kind of born out of that 13-year-old self for you that you're like, yeah, let me like explore a little further on what that would have been like. Maybe we're not in Star Wars land, but there is a lot of sci-fi in this, and there is a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, combined. So is that kind of the world Gene Ha would have visited?
Kind of in some ways. I mean, like the world is a combination of a lot of things I love, and the characters are based. I did not have sisters growing up, but I did have brothers, and it's a lot of it's based on my relationship with my late older brother, who was
Okay.
everywhere he went, he was a cool kid. Like
Mm.
other kids were like just come up to me and whisper, "Man, Gene, your brother is so cool." And a little bit of it, if they were friends of mine, was kind of saying, "Why isn't he like you? Why is he cool?"
Aw.
He was cool. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not normal for a 13-year-old to be that cool.
I guess
I mean, like,
so. Wow. But now in this storyline, they're very different, May and Abby,
oh yeah.
obviously. So you're again, like you said, there's that relationship, but ultimately they connect and there's love. And so I guess that's of course a parallel that was there for you with your own family experiences in terms of your relationship with your loved ones. But I want to kind of talk about some of the fun things because there's
Uh,
so many. And I think one is let's talk about the warrior cats because I guess are you a cat person? If you say are you people ask are you a dog or a cat person? But why warrior cats?
um, okay, I should mention I do love cats, but I'm more of a dog person.
Okay.
But a lot of the inspiration for May was, especially at the time when I started coming up with the idea of May, back around 2013, 2014, there wasn't as much representation of female geeks in pop culture who are main characters. And I looked at all my friends who, I mean, I work in comics. I know a lot of comics creators, artists, and writers who are women, a lot of retailers, people who work or own comic shops who are women. So I'm surrounded by all these amazing female geeks. And I was like, why can't they be the main character? Why can't they be the hero of the story? And at first, actually, I wanted to make the older sister, Abby, the action hero, the main character. But she's somebody who comes at the world uh, refusing to change. And
Mm,
when she is able to fix a problem, it's because she's true to herself. But so she's not a dramatic character in that sense. A dramatic character is a character who starts off in one place, meets a crisis, and then changes and becomes a better person or a worse person to adapt to the crisis. And that's not what Abby does. She's stubborn as hell, which is typical of an action hero. I mean, that's superheroes. If if Batman changed his personality every time he reached a crisis, he wouldn't be Batman anymore, which is why the movie serials self-destruct because they're trying to force him to be a dramatic character and he has to stop being Batman to grow up.
okay. I see.
And
I
that happens
see.
with every new actor of Batman. Or Conan, like Conan can't do that. Captain Marvel can't he constantly be like changing who she is every few issues.
Yeah.
She can grow a
Yeah.
little, but not a lot.
Hmm.
May was more interesting to me because she's somebody who looks at the world, asks questions, and that she is willing to adapt and respond and change how she looks at the world to deal with it. And that story was much more interesting to me. And this is, I could keep on building on this series, but there's not really, May is not an action hero. She's not an iconic character as opposed to a dramatic character. She changes, and that's why I liked it. And that's what I like about my friends. Are the people who I really, really bond with are people who are able to look at the world and see problems for themselves and change to become a better people. And if it's very rare to be somebody who's just so incredibly excellent at the start, they know they don't have to change.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that's the true hero's journey, though, right? So we could
yeah,
say, like, yeah, this is the action hero and et cetera, but like the true hero's journey that gets
yeah,
them to that point is
yeah,
definitely just self-discovery, I would
right.
say. And oh man, let me know when you figure that out because I'm still trying to figure it out. But
I'm gonna,
but May figures it
this,
out, you know?
yeah, I'm gonna do this as a total side note thing, but I
Sure.
think in my life, if I'm gonna force my life into story terms, I
Hmm.
feel like I'm a really interesting, fun, useful supporting character. I'm not in like if you asked me earlier what Star Wars character I am, modern day Gene Ha is not Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader or Princess Leia. Modern day or young Princess Leia. Gene Ha today is more of a Yoda character, and I can help you on your journey and stuff like that. But I don't have that many crises in my life. I don't have that many dramatic like changes. I'm 55 years old. I kind of figured out what I like doing and how I can help people, and I like to keep on doing it. And I will change, and I do change if I figure out I'm really screwing something up or I'm really hurting somebody. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with who I am, and I don't have a lot of drama in my life.
I gotta say though, Yoda's a pretty awesome character to be.
Oh yeah, but I would not want to have an adult Yoda series or TV series or an adult Yoda movie. It's just kind of like nah, he's kind of got
Not
he
enough
doesn't have anywhere
conflict.
to go. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
not enough
that's
conflict.
yeah, there's not enough. Yeah.
Except deal it's more like the period of when Yoda, when Luke goes to train, it's more like dealing with my teenage son. That's conflict. That type of
Okay,
conflict. That was probably the most conflict Yoda had.
let me put this into real life terms in a real situation, which is you you are a real Luke Skywalker type character,
Mm.
where like you see these crises, like the whole uh man education the education system in Florida is not representing Asian history at all. Maybe I can do something to do that, and then you bring people on board, and then you brought a Yoda on board to help out, but you were the Luke Skywalker who's going kind of going out there and doing the main mission. So yeah, you are a protagonist. I'm not so much of a protagonist.
Well, I don't know if that's a good thing. The
Oh
protagonist
no, it's
usually
horrible. It's horrible being a
super
protagonist.
stressful.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
super
thank you for doing
stressful.
that.
Uh, well, I
I'm going to
guess
mention this if you don't know.
somebody has to do
She
it.
talked to state legislators. She had to go out there and talk to them. But like, you know, it'd be nice if we did this. And I'm going to figure out ways that'll actually be useful for you as a politician to actually make this happen, which is not, you may have noticed, it's not necessarily in the nature of every legislator to want to actually make good things happen. That's what maybe convinced them to do.
Thank you for that. And I will say, I'm definitely taking a bit of a hiatus from doing that again, because it was one of the most difficult things I've kind of tackled in terms of my advocacy and activism. And talking to legislators was not fun at all, especially I'm going to just straight up say in Florida, right, where I sat across from so many people that I disagreed with. But the fact that it could get done, there's something to be said for that, right? And that we're now at a point where we have things to build upon and we're hopefully progressing things and kind of bringing it back to our characters in the book. There's a lot of characters that are like that, even though they're not maybe the main character. They're also, and I wouldn't say just like the Yoda where I don't have conflict, but they're like helping the heroes or the main essential characters onto that journey. Like they'll get into a battle and they're, oh my gosh, we're about to get like in the forest. And is it Petra?
Oh
Is that
yeah,
her name?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Things
Petra
like that
Stoneheart.
where like, okay, then they come in and they get sort of, backup support and they kind of they've got allies, right?
Yeah,
So I think that that's super important. And so how did you decide like who were going to be, team Mae and Abbie and then and because there's a lot of different, I want to say groupings, like I don't want to say teams, but there's a lot of different communities within the book that they come across. And of course we're going across worlds and stuff. But tell me how the formation of those characters were and which ones that you love or which ones that you were like, oh, this one was a lot of fun to create and what was that process like?
Okay, so I'm gonna mention this. I'm assuming when you label this for broadcast or
Spoiler
distribution later.
alerts.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a spoiler.
Yeah.
So there's gonna be
Yes.
spoilers here.
Yes.
Okay, so building the world of the friends and people around May is mainly based in the real world. She knows people in Indiana and the geek community there and her friends. So that was very much basing May upon my geek friends and inevitably somewhat on myself, but also on my female geek friends who I thought, oh, these are awesome people. I actually went out and asked them questions about their lives and what they liked and what their days were like. And that expanded out to her best friend, Dahlia, who's the redheaded
Hmm.
character on the cover, and just building a reasonably believable community of friends around her, including her boyfriend and some other things like that, and then tweaking things to kind of make it fit all together. Now, building Abby's world is a little bit different, and I'm just going to give a little bit of a spoiler here. It's not revealed immediately, and it's not actually said out loud, but it becomes very clear that she was a lesbian girl growing up in rural Indiana in a school where lesbians are not accepted.
Hmm.
And then she finds a fantasy world where that's not as much of a problem. And also where being somebody who punches first and asks questions later turned out to be a useful skill for the problems at hand at the time she showed up. And she's really good at punching things.
Yes, I've noticed that.
Yeah. So suddenly she finds a world where she's useful and accepted, and she begins finding love. Petra Stoneheart becomes the person who recognizes she's an awesome person, and they do eventually fall in love. And I'm going to mention, and then building on from there is just like what kind of adventures. It's essentially is building a world where Abby would feel useful.
Hmm.
And so I made this whole list of like past adventures of her, and you'll hear it mentioned there, where all these monsters she's fought, and mad scientists and events and stuff like that. Mad scientists she took on, and it's not covered now because that was my original idea for the story of punchy girl goes to another world and punches bad people, and it was just kind of like it that didn't keep my interest long enough when I realized, oh, I could tell a story about May who goes into this world and then sees how if you keep on trying to punch things until all the problems go away, you're eventually going to get to problems that can't be punched away. And you're going to have to look at what's really going on and what the real problems are. And I've seen this in real life too, where like there are people who assume when something annoys them, it's because a villain is trying to get at them and they need to punch the villain. And I mean, that's kind of literally like the whole philosophy of like, that's the whole reason why Kung Fu has philosophy behind it. So
Yes,
you don't punch the wrong people all the time.
exactly. And you definitely don't punch first.
Yeah,
Right. And so yeah, and I love that, right? As a martial artist, I definitely relate to Abby in terms of her like go-getter, very, very, very spirited and everything. But from a martial arts aspect, you're right. There's just so much more behind like the thought process of like the physicality is not the main purpose of being a martial artist, right? It's learning
yeah,
the respect and kindness and fellowship and then mastering yourself. And that definitely
yeah,
doesn't come with just punching first and asking questions later. And of course, we are talking about like young teenage girls, so like
yeah,
they're not gonna ask. They're gonna be impulsive in a sense. But I did want to kind of backtrack a bit because I thought it was really important that one. I love how you made these instead of like it's like you and your brother on the page, like you made it specifically like female heroines because of, like you said, the lack of geek girl representation at the time. And I think it has improved a bit, but we always have
yeah,
more to go and have some balancing. And also LGBTQ representation, right? In a really fun way that's not drawing attention like, oh, hey, we're throwing this in your face. Like, look at this. It's just part of the story. It's just part of the love story. And like, I think that's why in the forest I was so I took to that right away with Petra and like that dynamic. And it was just kind of like very, very seamless in the storytelling versus kind of performative, which is
Yeah.
always a relief too, because it's unfortunate that in storytelling it has to be one or the other sometimes, and you feel kind of that dissonance. But did you already know in advance with all these characters, like here are themes that are important to me because of you're very clearly aware of the lack of representation in the comic book genre and like how as a medium rather not genre like as a medium like
Yeah.
it's not necessarily always present like how did you kind of determine what you were going to tackle because there's a lot in there too like there's class systems there's also different things with like power dynamics of course and that's like every action story has that but like there was some very intentional things to me maybe I'm reading too much into it with politics and society because that's where my brain is always at these days.
Oh. Uh, well, okay. So, obviously, I'm a geek who loves fantasy and science fiction. So I'm familiar, of course, with like, say, the novel Dune. The movie hadn't come out yet when I started this, and also, of course, they had noble houses inside of Dune. But then they took that concept of noble houses in space, and then they applied that to Star Wars. So I grew up with Queen Amidala and Lord Vader and things like that. And there's this weird fantasy romanticization that we Americans have about the idea of royalty and nobles that kind of misses the point about how it's like, you're just not magically this most charming, prettiest girl, so therefore you end up as the princess. It's no, no matter what kind of person you are, you're just the princess, and you can be a jerk all day, and you're still the princess. So I did want to include a little bit of that, and it was just like trying to take. I love history and stuff like that, and I've kind of seen the history of like the idea of somebody appointing to a job, getting the job because they were born to that job because their dad did it, and therefore they got to rule the kingdom or they got to rule the county or the duke, the duchy. Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes it works out, and sometimes It works out very, very badly.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean, because you're not qualified, you're just born into it, right?
yeah, and yeah, sometimes you're the right person for it, and sometimes you get trained for it, and sometimes it turns out you're really, really not suited for the job, but nobody can do anything about it.
Hmm.
But you're just entitled. It's literally entitlement. It's you have a title. You're entitled to the job because you have the title. And we Americans kind of love this idea so much of just like someone born to the job. And we kind of love the idea of somebody who's entitled, which is insane because everybody needs to have a way where they can be fired if they're horrible at their job. And
This is
sometimes we
true.
just don't have it. Yeah.
This is so true. And you're right. It's very romanticized. And I admit, like, I'm always like, oh, the crown. And
Yeah.
there's this lure to that world. And I'm like, wow, this is so classist. It's like pretty bad that we're constantly reinforcing the fact that it can be beautiful because in movies and stuff everyone's really beautiful too right which isn't definitely wasn't always the case but and not such a superficial thing but you're right it's like you should be fired and I do you think it has because you're kind of a history buff and probably more knowledgeable about me in this but like I always look at like the trends right like okay in this
Yeah.
era this was very problematic. And I always try to be hopeful that we're progressing, that,
Yeah.
like women representation is improved or equal rights. And are we going in the right direction? So in terms of entitlement, I find that a really like a buzzword that people get very sensitive about, but I use it a lot because I feel like I'm around a lot of entitled people and I also feel that I am also entitled. Like I
Oh yeah.
sometimes I'm like, "Ooh, I'm being a little bit too like I deserve this because," right? And
Yeah.
so, do you feel like we're in a phase now where that's at an all-time high? Do you feel like we've come where are we in that up where are we in the wave of this?
I'm basing this a lot on pop culture, but like in the 1930s, after we hit the Depression, there was a huge fascination in movies with millionaires and the children of millionaires, who that time was equivalent of pretty much billionaires, falling in love and their dramatic, travails and stuff like that, and Philadelphia Story and stuff like that. It was always about heiresses and stuff like that. All these romantic stories about heiresses, which essentially was the American princess story. And we're really, really getting back into that again. Like I'm an old man complaining about this, so keep that in mind. But I mean, like, I have never understood the Kardashians. But
Me neither.
the yeah, the whole point is that they're princesses and they're living this charmed royal life because
Yes.
they're the children of the right rich guy. I will say, is it the oldest one? Kim Kardashian is very good at being a Kardashian. I don't know if
Oh,
it's a
yeah,
job
yeah.
anyone needs, but I
Yes.
mean, it's really impressive how she does it because
It is. It is. I saw her on, what is it, a conversation with Dave Letterman. I don't know what it's
yeah,
called. It's or, next with or anyway, and it was like he
but
was
yeah,
floored by it because he made fun of her before and he was like, "Wow, but you're really good at it. You're making a lot of money. You're a businesswoman. You're right that she's good at it." But I'm like, but would she have that platform if she wasn't a Kardashian? And
yeah, or yeah, I mean, like her younger sisters especially, but also her. I have no idea why anyone cares what her favorite wine or liquor
right,
or
or
car is,
lattes of the
especially.
day.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather hear about somebody who's actually trained in liquor or wine, like a sommelier. Like, if I care
Exactly.
about what a sommelier thinks about is a really good wine. I don't really care about what like a famous musician or reality TV star thinks is a good wine or stuff like
This is
that.
true.
But
But yet society does by the millions of followers they have, right?
yeah, and I'd
So,
rather, she has stylists who pick good clothes for her, but I don't care what her even or guys who are equivalent, like oh God, muscle influencers. I don't care what their opinions on clothes are. I'd rather hear about like somebody who actually knows about clothes and that's their job and their I'd rather hear from their stylist directly than hearing from them. Let's put it
yeah,
that
you
way.
like to hear from the experts on
Yeah, somebody who actually
expertise.
knows it.
That's so weird. Why would you want to hear from someone who actually studied or like has a background in that? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're also in this weird phase also where people don't care like people don't care about sellouts anymore, which is really, really weird to me. Of just
Mm,
like restaurant reviews from people who are being paid by the restaurant. And that's not disqualifying. And
hmm.
that I really don't get because it's kind of like if you paid me $50,000 to say something nice about a restaurant, it'd be very hard for me to not say, oh, I love this amazing restaurant. This Kentucky Fried Chicken has the best chicken in the country. And it's just like, it obviously wouldn't be true. But
Right.
if you paid me $50,000, it'd be very hard to resist the temptation to do that. I'd be
This
totally
is true.
biased.
This is very true. You'd be very biased. And but
And
yet
people
we as
know
a
this.
public, we know that and yet we still
Yeah.
fall for it. So what does that say about us? Ooh,
Yeah.
are
Wait, I'm
we
gonna
need
go a
to
little.
study more.
Okay. Like 20 years ago, the New York Times restaurant critic Ruth Reichel came out with a memoir.
Okay.
And at that time, she was famous for putting on disguises so she could go to restaurants without the restaurant knowing it was her. And it was so important for her for the restaurant not to know she was there, not to put on a special act, but also it went without saying, if you're doing all that work so the restaurant doesn't recognize you, they're not paying you.
Right, 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 right.
And that's why you could, as much as possible, if you had any similar taste in restaurants to Ruth Reichel, you could trust her opinions
Mm-hmm.
because you knew she wasn't being paid. And
Right.
if she'd written a memoir about, and then this restaurant paid me, and this is like a figure I actually heard as a true thing of like, I if you had been paid $20,000 to advocate to record a video talking about how great this restaurant is, and then the influencer does that, I don't know why anyone cares. So it's very confusing to me.
It's
We're in
very
a weird,
confusing to me too. We're in a weird place with the
yeah,
influencers
yeah,
and
they're
like why they're so validated in having this opinion. Like they're entitled to their own opinion, but at the same time, it's fascinating that their opinion becomes like what sells.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm kind of bringing you back to your original question. It's the fact that they're popular and it makes them entitled, and we like the fact that they're entitled, and the fact that they're being paid by a restaurant to become more entitled makes us respect their opinion more. So yeah, we're in this weird entitlement loop where being entitled makes you more respected, and I don't get it.
I, well, you and I can just grumble about it together and be like, we
Yeah.
don't understand. We can sit on the couch in pajamas and eat potato chips and talk about
Yeah.
it.
I would rather listen. I mean, I do listen to like say random YouTubers and stuff like that, but I tend to kind of go to the ones who kind of look like they're sitting on a couch eating potato chips.
I may have to do an episode like that one day.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sifu Mimi Chan special episode. Comic convention, hotel suite. We're going to sit around with a bunch of people, eat potato chips, and watch bad movies or something.
Yeah, yeah, we can just like have commentary. I think we could make this happen. I mean, after all, last time you and I spoke and you told me you hadn't met Kelly Sue DeConnick in person, I said, "Oh, really? Let's have a reunion." And then all this magic happened in Portland a couple years ago. And so now, yeah, so now we have to concoct another plan, obviously, because I'm all about these reunions.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah. Uh, uh, okay. We're going to set on record here. It's possible. We're going to see if this happens. My interpretation is that hopefully sometime in 2025 we're going to have the Wonder Woman Historia slumber party episode. We're going to dress in schlubby pajamas or sweatpants or stuff like that, eat junk food, and talk about stuff on camera.
So Wonder Woman History Reunion Slumber Party. Let's hope that happens because we're putting out that energy in the universe. But in terms of when you get to create your own world, how cool is that? It makes me feel like, okay, this is something I should be doing. You always get to pick the names of things.
I do.
And I think I'm noticing that as you go, like the name of the monster is this, and the languages are different and things like that. But I feel like when I was looking in the book, the one time it really jumped out at me was like, where does he come up with these words? Where does he come up with these names? Was when you're like, let me show you the history of Simmer. How do you say it? Simmerton?
Oh, Simmer Terran. There's a T in front of the S.
Simmer.
Yeah.
So why
And it's
why simmer Terran? Where do you where do you come up with these things? How do you are you just creating a language or what sounds or is it
uh, it's
in relationship to something?
it's based on Czech. So the Czech language, and I
Oh,
didn't
I
want to go
think you
with
told me this last time.
yeah. And
It
just
sounds
just a
familiar.
really quick summary then.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go with things that sound like English castles. Like I grew up in a subdivision as a teenager with street names and subdivision names like Knollwood, Lincroft, Foxcross. So to me, that those the names on Game of Thrones sound like a boring subdivision with a golf course built into it, which is where I grew up. I couldn't go with Swedish or German because they'll sound like heavy metal names, which sound a little bit trying too hard. French sounds a little bit too pretentious in American English. And then I found Czech. Oh, I should also mention, I also considered Japanese, but then it's kind of like, I'm going to feel really fake as a Korean doing that. And also, it's going to feel like I'm going to be stomping on the toes of anime fans who know more about everything about Japan than I do. Um,
Yeah, dangerous territory.
yeah. So, but yeah, then I found Czech, and the sounds of the words were amazing. The spelling of the words were amazing. It sounded kind of alien, but also kind of a little heavy metal, but not familiarly heavy metal.
Okay.
So it just seemed like a lot of fun. And also the Czech history is fascinating because it's like when they broke free from the Soviet Union's Warsaw Pact, their first president was a renowned poet and playwright,
Okay.
a literary figure. So Václav Havel, who's famous for his novels and things. They're a very philosophic nation. They're famous for their sense of humor, which is incredibly
Really?
dry. Yeah, it's very, very kind of Monty Python-esque. And the name of the world comes from a prank that was played by people under communism, the state-run radio station, and they began broadcasting history little segments about the greatest Czech of all time. Yeah, I'm going to mispronounce this probably. Yara Zimmerman, and all these things where he invented the telephone, but unfortunately he did it a day after Alexander Graham Bell did. He did all these great engineering feats and invented light bulbs the day after someone else in the world does, and then he can't get the patent for it.
Oh my gosh.
But the thing is, Yara Zimmerman never existed. And the censors in the government were trying to figure out how they were going to ban this, and they couldn't. But it was just all this big joke. And it was a little bit of a joke about how, frankly, there's sometimes not enough engineering, invention, and frankly, military glory, like explorer glory and stuff like that. All these other countries have these glorious things
Yes.
happening, and it never happened inside of the Czech lands, it felt like. And they were making fun of that, and they wanted to ban it, but they couldn't. And it became this national hero where, like, the big national Czech theater is now named after Yara Zimmerman, who is a
So,
fictional playwright.
so
There's like a
okay. I love this. There's a lot of layers here. One is in deciding on this language and creating this world, you're like, let me look into languages. And then that takes you down
Yeah.
the rabbit hole of searching the history of things. And then you're now have all this information about the Czech historic background and how deep does this go? Like, does this take you off track when you're working on a project? And do you just go, oh, wait, that's right. I'm supposed to be writing this book, but then I mean, how deep does the rabbit hole
It,
go? Because it's so fascinating to me that you know all of this now because of this project, but it does go hand in hand, right? Like
yeah.
it's so fascinating.
I had to work with to get this as right as I could. I worked with a Slavic studies professor at the University of Chicago through email. I still haven't met her, but yeah, I've sent her thank you books and stuff like that. I'm sorry, I'm bad with names. It's in the book. There's a thank you to every edition of the book. There's a thank you to her. But yeah, and she helped me with that. Oh, and also I should mention the reason why the world is called Simmer Terran is because that means that essentially means Yara Zimmerman's world.
Oh my gosh, of course.
And he's the person, the real Czech, who discovered the doorway to another world, but he couldn't talk about it with the government because at the time he lived, they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or the time he lived,
Quote
quotation
unquote
marks.
lived, right?
Um, yeah, and if the imperial government found out about it, they would take the world away from the Czechs. They wouldn't be able to explore it anymore.
Wow.
And then
Okay.
tied that I tied that in with American history, where there are Czech Americans. Some of them found out about it and began helping out the Czechs in exploring this world. And then African Americans found out about it. And just like with the Czechs, they knew if the national government of the United States found out about it, it would not be a safe place for African Americans to explore anymore. So they kept it secret too.
Wow.
And then around 1914 or 1911, all the doorways between the worlds closed, and communication between two worlds stopped, which is why we have very different technology and very different cultures on the two worlds. When the older sister, Abbie, finds a doorway that's still open.
Right. And I love that in the book you also have, oh, we brought over, was it chocolate or there was something that was like
Oh,
to
yeah.
there was like, oh, we brought this. How
Chocolate and
did you
black
get
pepper.
this? Or yeah, or
Yeah.
something like that. It was like, oh, we got the goods. What are they called?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
when
Trade goods.
yeah, trade goods, but also it's like contraband, right? Like it's like, oh, we
Yeah.
got this contraband, and it's just really funny. And I love I would love to be on the like list of like, okay, let me pick all the cool things that we get to bring into the world. But yeah, during this cemetery history lesson, we're getting so that's where I was really seeing a lot of the kind of the themes of politics and like kind of this society and social issues that when I think of history, I go, oh, this is from before. This is historical. This is, oh, wait, no, most of these problems still exist in some manner. And it's always a little depressing to me because I feel like, on one hand, I really want us as a human species to have evolved in a way that is harmonious. And I want this like
Yeah.
utopia. This is why I like, uh, fantasy, right? And
Yeah.
but then at the same time, it kind of depresses me because it feels like we're going backwards a lot of the time, especially now,
Yeah.
during, just, put this post this election and just all the things that for me here in Florida, we're always combating. It just there's so many things that we take steps backwards from, but I do enjoy seeing it in comic books because it's a little lighter, a little bit
Yeah.
lighter, but at the same time, it
Yeah.
does still really hit home.
Yeah, there's a thing that a lot of science fiction authors have said, which is you can explore topics in science fiction that are just way too touchy to discuss as real current day events and current problems,
Mm.
because it gives you a little bit of distance if you see, I mean, returning to Star Wars, an evil empire that's supposed to have been like 10,000 years in the past instead of in the present day, or in Dune, 10,000 years in the future instead of the present day. And no, you can't take too much offense, but you can totally nail the problems we're dealing with today, because every story they've written is really written about its present day, even if it's supposed to be about the past or present.
Mm. Interesting. And I'm sure that's the case for this story for you as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. You're like, yes, 100%.
Again, I forgot any names because I also worked for the new edition I expanded a little more on the history of African American explorers inside of
Yes.
Cimarron.
Yes.
And I worked with, I forgot her name because I'm bad with names, historian who specializes in 19th century African American history, who was able to make
Ah,
all these amazing suggestions to me of who the people are who explored the world. And I wanted to
right.
use real figures as much as possible.
Oh, okay. So for
There's
example,
no, oh God, okay, I'm gonna think. There's a new section where, in one of the early adventures, when after May helps save a town, and that's a
mm-hmm,
whole story in itself with her sister.
mm-hmm.
There's a new section where she goes to a bookstore inside that town,
Yes. And
and
this
the
is the
bookstore owner,
history of Samaritan, right? That says I have a
yes,
and drew it.
Simmerterran. It's hard for me
Cemetery.
to say too.
Sorry, I'm messing it up.
If you say Simmerterran, it's gonna no one there's unless there's a very angry check out there, no one's gonna care if we say it wrong, so it's fine. It's a comic book. Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna hold this up. So
Yeah, and it's where it says all in black and white, right? And then it
yeah,
goes
there's
to black and white. Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is the introductory framing section of that story. And then my friend Damon Hampton drew this new section where a character who shows up peripherally inside the book earlier turns out to be the bookstore owner, and she shows a comic book she drew about the history of African Americans exploring this fantasy world. Oh, and there's so many names. If you look up the names here, I'm not gonna be able to remember them
I
all.
see one like Matthew Henson. Is that?
Oh yeah, T. Thomas Fortune. Oh, and there's like one of my favorites was there's an Arctic explorer. Let me see. Matthew Henson. Matthew Henson. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's and he's a real Arctic explorer who was African American. And he was very famous and very successful, but he kind of got a little bit less fame and money for doing that because he did it while he was black.
Right, well, shame on him. How dare
But
he?
yeah, but then he also in my comic book story, he's also one of the explorers of Cimarron.
Hmm. Oh, yes, 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 yes. And I think this is where it's always interesting to me because I question myself. I'm like, wait, how much of this is real? What is not? And it's so Gene Ha of you to have inserted like a lot of factual information. And I think a lot of uh creators do that in a sense, but I think I love the extent of research that you do, and then you've given yourself like so many history lessons through making this book. You must feel like you have another degree in something.
Yeah, I mean, there's also kind of like there's an element, there's a style of storytelling I really enjoy, which I'll compare to the first Star Wars movie, Episode 4, where they mention the Galactic Senate, but they don't show the Galactic Senate. They give you details that you can dig into. They mention the Clone Wars, they don't show the Clone Wars. That you can imagine, that kind of act as a spark to your imagination. If you want to imagine it, you can. Or another case where it uses real history, fractured fairy tales from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, where they'd show, or I'm sorry, Mr. Peabody, the time traveling dog from that. That's the one I want, not fractured fairy tales, where they would deal with real historical events, but then handle in a really jokey manner. And they trap this dog and his assistant human boy would travel to the past and talk to historical figures who would all turn out to be kind of a little bit jokey and silly and dealing with ridiculous problems. But if you wanted to dig into it, there's a real history to it. And it's clear that the people who wrote the stories knew the real history, but just wanted to give a fun introduction to it, where if you have the urge to dig deeper into it, or if you encounter that person later in a history class or just in your casual reading, you'll really realize, oh, I know who that is and why they're important. And I'm curious about finding out about their real story. And Matthew Henson has an amazing history beyond the slightly fictional history I gave him of exploring a fantasy world through a portal, a dimensional portal.
Yeah, and I think this is the beauty of comics, right? Is that there's like I think it's much more respected now, but in the past
Yeah.
it's like it can't be literature, it can't be this and that, and it's just it's fascinating to me because my husband is the one that introduced me to comics and was like he told me all his vocabulary was from reading comics. Like he grew up as bilingual, but he spoke Spanish only in the house and then went to
Oh
school
wow.
and learned English. But comics was definitely, a path that helped with his vocabulary and things like that, so that you can learn so much. But I think it's also such a great way to introduce people young readers, older readers,
Yeah.
two different subjects that they may have interest in, and just kind of name dropping that. But the thing is, I don't know that we would know that these are real, these are real historians and real adventurers and real explorers. But if they listen to this podcast, they will.
Oh yeah. I'm just going to say one of the signatures of if you put me on a project and give me a chance, I'm always going to try to add layers to it where I'm going to try to keep the surface moving quickly. I'm not going to you don't have to know all the history or take the history I put into it seriously to enjoy the story as just a quick 15-minute read.
Hmm.
But if you do read it slowly, you're going to see these details. And if you ever do the Googling or asking a historian uh, about the stuff I put into it, you're going to find all these extra layers to it, which I'm trying as much as possible to actually be a foothold for you to kind of find out more about what I'm thinking of and the history of these things.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I
oh,
think, go ahead.
oh yeah. Okay, I'm just going to give a preview of a totally different project right
Oh,
now.
all right.
Okay, so this is I'm going to show you a page from I'm doing a story of a spinoff from Patton Oswalt's Minor Threats, and I'm doing a Crab Louie story with Gail Simone.
Oh,
And
I love Gail.
oh, she is she has the best sense of humor in the world. Uh, and we have a character who's kind of the question slash Mr. A, Steve Ditko's Mr. A slash Rorschach from The Watchmen.
Hmm.
And I didn't have to do this, but I decided I was going to put in references when we do a flashback of the history of this character. I was going to do references to, of course, The Watchmen a little bit, and that is in the story. But then I kind of dug deep into that to make it deeper. And then I decided to put in all these references to the real history of Steve Ditko and his characters, and also the philosophy of Steve Ditko, because by the end of his life, he became this um, obsessive Ayn Rand objectivist. Let me see, here's the page here where you can see the kind of the
Nice.
character.
Hmm.
There's a lot of references to nine panel grids, which is the signature of Watchmen. But then
Okay.
also, Gail said, put in a page of his journal. And she didn't describe very much of what it was supposed to be on the journal. And it's kind of like, oh, Gail, you said that to Gene Ha.
Yeah, I know. There's just going to be so many layers.
Yeah. So I had to figure out how to take so the philosophy of Steve Ditko in real life by the 1970s was there was black and white, there's good and bad, and anyone who's trying to find shades of gray is just uh, compromising themselves and compromising what's actually good and making everything bad. Compromise just makes things bad. And then, but then the theme of the character is he's actually by the end called nine panel grid, and he's obsessed with the number nine. So how do you take a person who's obsessed with the number two and turn it into somebody who's obsessed with the number nine? And I had to figure out that philosophy.
Oh my gosh.
So what I
I'm
eventually came up with, and this took a few weeks of thinking, was if you see here in the middle,
wow.
there's good and there's evil,
Hmm.
and then this is all Steve Ditko stuff. And a version of one of this good evil dichotomies is there's faith and religion, which is bad, which is lies, and there's rationality and truth. And then
Hmm.
I took that and turned it into a Dungeons and Dragons alignment chart, like lawful good, chaotic evil,
Wow.
but it's based on good versus evil and truth versus
Versus,
faith.
hmm, wow.
And then, but the
It's very
only,
Gene Ha of you.
but because of his philosophy, the only part that's actually good is this top corner where it's good plus good. Everything else is evil.
Only I see the truth. Only I am willing to act. I am point.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and that I think is actually a pretty accurate representation of how Steve Ditko saw the world. Oh, okay. And
Wow.
a little more of like how I dig into things.
Yes.
I also tracked down his art assistant from the 1990s. And I
Okay.
interviewed her I asked her some questions by email and she helped out.
Wow.
And she actually said he was a great boss. He was very considerate, described what kind of hamburgers he likes, how he was like,
Okay.
yeah, he had a good view of the Macy's Day Parade, the Macy's parade going down the streets. And he'd let her sit in the office and do that. Just a great boss altogether. And I know she also used to work, that assistant is known by her stage name, musician April March.
Okay.
She's also famous for she did the song Chick Habit, which got featured inside of Quentin Tarantino movie.
Wow.
Uh, and and also she worked for John Kricfalusi of Ren and Stimpy, who was a
Okay.
famously bad boss.
Oh, okay.
And so her saying that Steve Ditko is a good boss had a lot of impact there. It's like, no, seriously, I have no complaints about him. He's a great boss. So I did soften my portrayal of the Steve Ditko character a little bit to represent he's actually a good person deep down. He just has a philosophy that could be used to make you into a real asshole, but
Wow.
he's not.
I not that I didn't have respect for you before as a creator, but wow, you really are also a detective.
Yeah,
I
I
would
mean,
say you're a detective on top of it.
I want all the details I put into a comic book to work together and to not, to not destroy. I don't want my arguments to destroy each other. I want it to
Mhm.
all make sense if you dig deeper, but I don't want to obligate you to dig deeper. And I feel like that's
Mhm.
the problem with things like some of the later, like the Star Wars prequels. They just dig into the boring stuff and try to explain it to you when they don't need to be explained. You
Yes,
just,
yes, I agree.
yeah. Or the later Matrix movies and stuff like that, where
Ugh.
like, people have probably heard me rant about this before. You've seen my other interviews. I might have done this in the previous one, but having a 5 minute discussion about the personal philosophies of air conditioning units is not necessary for the story.
Yeah, I don't
Unless you,
even know that I paid attention to that. I blocked that out from my memory.
oh
I've
yeah,
erased that whole thing, which just
yeah,
was so sad because you enjoyed the first one so much. And then it's like,
yeah,
it kind of puts a damper on the originals. But I think this is like in the mind of Gene Ha episode for
yeah.
sure. I'm really getting in the mind here.
You, you have to trust the reader a little bit. And
100%.
yeah,
Our friend Greg Rucka is always like, please stop making us feel like we're stupid by constantly explaining everything. You have to trust the viewer, you have to trust the reader
yeah,
and give us a sense of the fact that we're intelligence.
yeah. I mean, art is a tool you give to the reader or the viewer that they're going to use for their own ends. And yeah, some people are going to use for the wrong ends. Some people are going to see the villains and say, "Oh God, yeah, I totally want to be the Joker." And there's nothing you can do that about as a creator. Uh, Alan Moore wanted Rorschach to be a character of mockery, and a lot of people just thought he is the coolest character in the world. I am Rorschach, and you can't fight that. You just have to give the tools to them and let them do what they will with it. Um, but the people who do understand what you're saying will understand what you're saying, and trying to
Mhm.
explain it more is not going to help,
No,
or
agree,
it's good,
agree.
or it'll ruin the artwork.
And yeah, it definitely ruins the experience. And so, okay, we're gonna be wrapping up with a couple more questions here. So, on that note of who the viewer is, who the audience is, I mean, who do you hope kind of embraces the story of Mae and Abbie? Who is this really written for in terms of like, the people that you want to reach?
I mean, honestly, I like one of the things that gives me a lot of joy is the fact that I've seen people hand copies of the graphic novel to just like 6 and 7 year olds, and they really enjoy it because things happen on the page. It's colorful, it looks fun. They're enjoying the story as they
There's
read
things
it,
that look like
and
dinosaurs.
yeah, they're reading at a surface level, which is it's like Looney Tune cartoons. They can be kind of deep, but if you just enjoy it for
Yeah.
the fact that there's Daffy Duck is bouncing around and the bill flies off his face and he has to grab it and put it back on his face, that's fine. I
Hmm.
want it to be fun at that level, but also if you keep on digging, I want it to be deeper. So yeah, I want it to be fun for little kids. I want it to be fun for people who are fascinated by European history or American history or gone through or anyone who has been the awkward, odd person out and just realizing that experience bonds you with almost everyone else, pretty much everyone else alive who's willing to remember how awful, both wonderful and awful childhood can be. I'm just going to describe a little bit of the first page of the scene where we just show why Abby stayed in the other world and stopped coming back to Earth when she was 13 years old. And it's a 4 page news section, but just the first page. She gets a call from a schoolmate, and it's a girl.
Hmm.
And the girl asks her out on a date to a movie. And there's a shocked pause by Abby. And then she says, yes, with a question mark. And then she hears a whole crowd of other kids laughing on the other side of the telephone, saying, oh, I knew she was gay. And they give her the nickname Grabby Abby,
Mm.
which really, really messes with her head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is based on an experience of mine, but this is the whole thing of like being entitled and privileged and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So when I was in fourth grade, a girl I was not interested in called me up on the phone. I'd never been on a date, and she asked me out on a date. And it's like, I was like, oh, well, I guess it'd be interesting going on a date for the first time. So I said, okay. He said,
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah, I'll see you later. And she didn't set up a time or anything and just hung up. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, that was weird. And the next day at school, there's a bunch of us sitting in the classroom. She was a classmate of mine. And she said, hey, I asked Gene out on a date. And he said, yes. Ha ha. And she was like, and the kids began laughing because it's like, oh, Gene's going to be embarrassed. And it's kind of like, I just said, yeah, so sure. And the fact that I wasn't embarrassed meant it wasn't a problem. But I was a heterosexual kid asked out on a heterosexual date, and I didn't care about it asked by a girl I was not interested in. And the things that make it so traumatic for Abby is because she's in a school where it's not cool being gay. She is gay, and she gets outed as gay and laughed at, and she actually is really sensitive about everything that happened. And it was just like me
Mm-hmm.
thinking that experience that wasn't so bad for me, that could be really bad in the right circumstances. And to get that scene right, I talked to a friend of mine who's a lesbian and asked her about her childhood. She's younger than me, so she's around the same age as like Abby should be, grew up around the same time.
Mm.
And we just kind of crafted it together so that it would be as painful as possible.
Wow. Yeah. Well, success on that. Painful is, and I think that's what's really draws you into the characters is not just a fun, adventurous tale. You get the darker sides. You get the stripes of the black and white where you're kind of on that emotional roller coaster and you feel for the characters when they go through these things. And yeah, you're right. And kids can be so mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I got really good at insults when I was 4 years old because I wanted to be a stand-up comic, and I loved them partially because we threw so many insults at each other in like fourth, fifth, sixth. Well, I've been going all the way through high school.
Hmm.
And being the one who had the best insults and comebacks was power, and I
Okay.
just wanted that. I wanted that
You
power
wanted
of
the
just like
power.
making. I want them to laugh at you, not me.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, it's often such a defense mechanism for bullies and things like that, even to just like, I'm going to pick on you because they're insecure or whatever, right? That's a whole nother
Yes.
discussion. But, to kind of wrap up at the end of this incredible volume set, we get so much artwork. Like you said, you said, I'm just going to fill it with everything, and you were not kidding. There's some gorgeous, gorgeous artwork with a lot of collaborators, and of course, this is the Gene Ha project, but there's a lot of collaborators on this, and I know you are a fantastic collaborator because everybody wants to work with you, probably because you're so detailed and you go down that rabbit hole, and also just the creative aspect of everything. But talk to me about, what did you just put an email out to all of your friends and say, hey, I'd love for you guys to draw? And you've got like, Frank Cho, Minna Connor, you've got just so many pinups at the back that, and just different styles that add Mike Norton. I really like that one, the black and white. There's just so many
Uh,
different styles in there that that lend to the characters and just gives you like, oh, I think a lot of people would say, I see May like that, or I see May like that. Like, because you know how art just speaks differently. But talk to me about
yeah.
all your collaborations and all the people who like, kind of helped you do a pinup.
I'm just gonna say. Oh God, there's so many of them, and
Yes.
it's just comics. I mean, I know some people live in a comics world where they see it as kind of very competitive and cutthroat, but among the creators I'm friends with and the way I've experienced them, they've been so incredibly supportive and friendly and helpful to me, and I want to help them too. So I'm just eternally grateful to them. Like, oh God, the Frank Cho cover is amazing, and uh, if you can get a copy of the monthly issue of that cover, it is just so incredibly beautiful. It's just he did just such a knockout job. My favorite drawing in the world of Abby is by Katie Cook,
Kitty Cook,
who when I
yeah, yeah.
first asked her, yeah, she was not quite famous yet, and now she is in the webcomics world. She is very famous now. But it is just the most beautiful painting of that character imaginable. Uh, Mark Buckingham did a bas relief painting, which we obviously can't reproduce in the comic, but there's like some gold elements in that illustration. You can see that what it looks like a raised surface there is an actual raised surface.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, it's so cool to see, and I always look forward to that, like the variable covers and the variations and everything, because it's just a nice, departure of like, oh, you're kind of used to this, but then you get this little splash, right? You get a little splash of color and fun, and or the black and whites, which I often I love as well. But I always think it's fun for you probably to see your characters come to life in a slightly different, view
Yeah,
through a different lens.
yeah. And also, I grew up on combined superhero universes like the Marvel Comics universe and stuff like that, the DC Comics universe, where everything is supposed to tie together and make sense. So those are officially non-canon, so that lets them be free to do whatever.
Mm.
Uh, yeah. So like, there's a story in the back where Abby, oh, I'm so horrible with names. The writer artist of the webcomic Multiplex. He's a friend of mine. I haven't seen him for a while. He did a non-canon story where Abby and May talk about their adventures that are non-canon, so therefore they did not happen officially.
Yes.
But maybe there's a version of Abby and May that did happen because they can go through a
Multiverse,
dimensional door. I should mention this. Yeah, there's a possibility there's another universe where those adventures did happen, and there's no magic as such, like hocus pocus magic inside of the world of May, but a world where in universes where that does happen, that could happen. And I have a fantasy someday of having Abby and May in Volume 3 meeting the alternate universe evil versions of themselves.
Oh, yes. That's always a fun take on things.
Yeah, I was going to say it's kind of a fantasy of like, boy, it would be really fun for almost anybody to imagine meeting the mirror universe of themselves. And
Hmm.
I guess the really horrifying part is if you realize, oh, the mirror universe version of myself is a good guy.
Right. That's what I was thinking too. I was like, yeah, I know how this is going for me for sure.
I
One of
have
my
never seen the
dearest,
bad part.
one of my dearest cousins, like she's like really close in age, and we grew up together. We used to think we were twins. We'd buy the same clothes and everything. And I always describe her as the nice twin. So
Aw.
I'm used to it. But all right, Gene Hawk, do you want to let listeners know how to pre-order, where to get this? Obviously,
Oh
follow
yeah.
you on social. I'll link all those things, but let's let people know where to find May.
Okay, so it's May, the definitive edition. It's officially coming out in April of 2025, but you can pre-order it now. And of course, I love local bookstores. I love local comic shops. You can order it at any bookstore or any comic shop. And if you have to, you can get it through Amazon or something like that. But I mean, there's a lot of really great comic shops out there,
Agree.
hopefully in your
Agree.
neighborhood or ones that do mail order. So yeah.
Yes, yes, please support local comic book shops. We love that as well. We want them to stay open. And if you can, even just go in there and talk to them, because you can order this one, but then maybe talk about a new comic and learn more. There's so much out there. Gene, it is always a pleasure to talk to you and keep up with you. Happy
Uh,
holidays to you. And just, I hope you're having a good time staying warm over there. I
it's
don't know.
Chicago, so
It's
it
Chicago. I
goes
was gonna
cold.
say yeah, it doesn't seem like it would be warm, but
Yeah, I'm wearing this for a reason. So
Always a pleasure. And Jean, hi everybody.
yeah, and everyone, looking forward to the Wonder Woman Historia Slumber Party, hopefully in 2025.
Yeah. Sounds good. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram or Facebook.